Hello, and thank you for listening to Rangers to the Core. This podcast is brought to you by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Wilmington District Environmental Education Team. With this podcast, we strive to keep you informed, educated, and give you a behind-the-scenes look at everyday life as a park ranger. I'm your host, Dylan Brown, and it is time to get to the core of today's topic. I'm your host, Dylan Brown at Philpott Lake, and we are here with the Wilmington District Environmental Education and Water Safety Crew. So just like normal, we're going to start off with our icebreaker. And our icebreaker for this month is, in your opinion, what's the best thing about working at a lake project? I would say the best thing about working at a lake project is just the variety of duties that you have as a ranger. For example, I've worked with the Forest Service before, and one of the big differences about working on a lake project is you have a boat. So you get to have that time on the water to kind of break things up a little bit. So it just makes for a large diversity of things you can do in your day-to-day activities. I would say that's probably my favorite thing about working at a lake project. And then for our next icebreaker, going to be the same question, but introducing a new member to the crew, Elaine Witry at Jordan Lake. So Elaine, in your opinion, I know you haven't got to experience it for too long at this point, but what's the best thing about working at a lake project?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be here. My favorite thing so far is when I show up to work, it's just as the sun is rising and I get to see the sunrise over the lake every day. And that has been really special.
For sure. Yeah, that's a great one. We definitely makes for some very picturesque moments. So that's awesome.
Hey, Dylan, I want to go next because mine kind of relates to what Elaine just said.
Absolutely.
So Ranger Emily here from up at John H. Carr, and my favorite thing about working at a lake project is that I get to be outside all the time, and I get to see some really cool things out in nature, whether it's walking some boundary line and I find a cool snake, or working in a park doing a water safety event and a bald eagle flies over, right? I love being able to be outside and actually getting to experience nature and the natural environment we get to work in every day.
Very good. All right. What about David?
Hey guys, this is David from Falls Lake, and I think the best part about working at a lake project is when you're doing your ranger duties, all of the other visitors are on probably vacation or they're off or it's the weekend. So it's kind of cool that like everyone else is being there, choosing to be there, and you're getting paid to be at the lake project. But at the same time, everyone else is on vacation and you're at work at the same time. So I always thought that's pretty cool that everyone around you, all the visitors, are probably on vacation or something, and you're working, which is good and bad, depending on how you look at it. So I think it's good, but some people may think otherwise.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that was my exact thoughts as you were going, is just that joy of working in the recreation industry or in a recreation job field is you are the person working when everyone else is vacating. So when you put that into perspective, it's like you said, in one sense, it's really fun because you kind of get to work where people vacate. But in another sense, you're working while you could be vacating if you had another job. So that's awesome, David.
Holidays, weekends, it all comes pros and cons to both.
That's right. All right, Carmen, what about you?
I pretty much agree with what everybody else has said. Love, being able to come to the lake every day, and it's just a beautiful place. Right from the very moment you step outside the car. At lunchtime, if you've been tied up at the computer all morning, you can get out and take a break outside and enjoy the beauty of it. So it's great. At the same time, one of my favorite things also at the lake and in the community too is just getting out and talking with people, being able to help them with their questions and such. I find that one of my favorite parts.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great point as well. So why don't you go ahead, and Carmen, and lead us into the core of today's podcast, because today's podcast has a lot to do with our icebreaker. It's almost like we planned it that way.
It sure does. So I'm super excited for what lies ahead with our podcast. But specifically today, we're kind of jumping into the career focus. And as we've mentioned in other podcasts, we've talked a lot about different aspects of careers. Specifically today, within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, there are many different career paths. We have architects, biologists, civil engineers, construction control technicians, contracting specialists, electrical engineers, environmental engineers, engineering technicians, information technology specialists, lock and dam operators, dredge operators, mechanical engineers, natural resources specialists, park rangers, realty specialists, survey technicians, hydropower operators, maintenance technicians, office administrators, financial program managers, and more. And I'm sure I've left out a lot, but you get it. There's lots of different career pathways throughout the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And really, there are so many opportunities. There's opportunities to work in major cities, in small communities, and at offices all across the world. So there's definitely a lot out there. But during today's podcast, we kind of want to start or begin from the start, I guess, per se. Briefly touch on the various jobs at the lake and dive into some frequently asked questions that we receive about working for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
All right. So touching on those brief jobs, I know the last podcast that we released was an interpretive podcast. So most of us that are on the environmental education team are our lake's interpretive rangers. That is obviously one of our ranger roles in doing environmental education and water safety outreach and things like that. Just real briefly, what's some of the other things we have at our lakes as far as different jobs and roles go?
So at our lake projects, we have a lot of different jobs and people doing different things. There's a lot of moving parts all at once. And I feel like we should kind of caveat this question with the statement that the U.S. Army Corps in operations at lake projects, field office sites, not every lake project looks the same, right? The office isn't structured the same. There's going to be a different number of people that work there. And so some of the jobs we might talk about now may not be at every lake project and vice versa, right? And so I feel like that's a good kind of caveat statement because I don't know that any lake project office actually looks the same across the country. But it can range, right? We have managers in our offices. We might have multiple managers in our offices. We have chief rangers in our offices. You may have shoreline rangers, park rangers that work more primarily on the rec side of things, the recreation side of things. We might have natural resource rangers that focus more on the forestry biology side of things. We may have GIS technicians that work at our offices. We could have office administrators, people who make sure we all get paid on time. So I feel like and I'm probably missing some even there. That doesn't even include maintenance and all the other stuff. So I don't know if anybody else has something to add, but I feel like every lake project is different, but we all will have some group of some of those people, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And we are going to cover some of those other groups in detail in future podcasts. So, for example, some of our lakes have foresters. Most of our lakes have a wildlife biologist or a shoreline ranger. And we'll talk about those things more in the future in a little more detail. But what's cool about those things is that we're all rangers first. So we're rangers first. We still have normal routine duties that we have as far as being a park ranger goes. But like I said, in the future, we'll definitely get down to the nitty gritty of some of those more specialized ranger positions.
Absolutely. I think that was a really good thing to talk about, Dylan, too, because we all do visitor assistance. We all do certain things all the time. We're all responsible for. So that's a really good way to put it.
All right. So next, my favorite question that I get when I'm doing like Army Corps of Engineers history programs or someone who has never heard of the Army Corps of Engineers is, are you in the Army? Are you a soldier? Did you go through basic training? That sort of thing. And it's funny because a lot of us are vets and we kind of scratch our head for a minute. We're like, well, yes and no. But the correct answer to that is no. We are not all in the Army. We are a civilian entity under the Army that's overseen by an active duty Army commander but it's a unique role for him as well, as he oversees a civilian workforce instead of an active duty military workforce. That's pretty unique. I know it's hard for some people to wrap their heads around. Do any of you guys explain that any differently?
I mean, we could go over and help out if we wanted to, and if there were opportunities. A lot of times there could be opportunities depending on what's going on in the world and everything. I think most of us choose not to, but the opportunity is there if we wanted to, based on currently what's going on in the whole, global environment as well.
That's true. There are a lot of opportunities to do different deployments and do different things after natural disasters, do more stuff. So that's a really good point. But I explain it just like you did, Dylan.
All right. So now that we got that little piece ironed out that we're not soldiers, who wants to describe a typical working day at the lake? And I say typical in quotation marks because there's not too much about our job that's typical or routine, but who wants to try to tackle that one?
No day's the same.
I mean, I think the weather and the visitors are big factors. I mean, we work outside and we work with visitors. So if all of a sudden a rainstorm and a big storm comes through, knocks down trees, and all of a sudden you got campers that are need assistance with no power at their campsite or something, I guess this really isn't answering your question about a typical workday, but it's I guess factors that could cause it not to be a typical workday are the weather, and then the public can be unpredictable at times, and they could, I mean, who knows who could come in the office and stuff, whether they got a problem or medical emergency or something. So I guess I'm not describing a typical workday, but I'm making examples of characteristics that could not cause a typical workday.
I think that's a really good point, though, David. I mean, and what you were alluding to, Dylan, no day's the same, for us as Rangers. Just something I really like about my job. There might be some similarities. We might go on patrol most days, or, for us as Intern Rangers, maybe more days out of the week we have programs or different things, and we're all providing visitor assistance. But what that actually looks like every day is different, just like what David was just describing, which, again, I enjoy because there is a level of routine, but at the same time, there's so much flexibility in because of what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. So, for example, I was a little late getting here today because I was dealing with fish stocking this morning. Department of Wildlife Resources was stocking the Upper Smith all the way up to our tail race at Philpott. And, tomorrow morning I got a program at 9 a.m. and then a program at noon at the local high school. So, I mean, that's just, back-to-back days, just a couple things that's totally different and as far as job duties go.
Absolutely. I mean, right now for us too, it's our burn season. I know there's a lot of our lake projects in the Wilmington district are conducting burns. I have coworkers conducting a burn right now. We're doing one tomorrow. Meanwhile, I've got programs just like you were saying, Dylan. I mean, and David, it's a fun part of the job, but lots of different things going on at once.
I will say some lakes have some kind of fun, like nuanced routines. For example, I know Grace isn't here today. When I worked at Kerr Scott, it was a routine that every day someone had to go in and take all the lake readings look at the chart and see what the CFS was, or cubic feet per second was coming out of the dam. It's just the volume of water. And then we filled out a little script and we would call the local radio station and record a little script. That way locals could tune into the radio and see what the water conditions were for their recreational or fishing needs or whatever might be there. And that's something, we usually had it planned out when I worked there. I'm not sure how they do it now, if one person does it or what, but that was one thing that got done, every single day. That was pretty routine.
I think another thing that most people do every day, or most offices do to some level, is a safety message, right? We're all about safety here with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We have to follow a lot of safety protocols, manuals, and ensure our own safety as well as our coworkers. And so we do daily safety messages. So I guess that's kind of a bit of a routine too.
Yeah, it's turned into one for sure, hasn't it? All right. What are some of the, this is a good segue, speaking of safety, what are some of the challenges of working at a lake project?
I think y'all already hit on some of that in the fact that a lot of what goes on is weather dependent and then visitor dependent too. So that can certainly cause you to have to stop what you're doing and kind of switch gears totally.
Yes. In the same breath that flexibility is awesome, it can also be a challenge, right? In what you're doing. Have to be okay with, stop and work on something to go assist with something else.
And another example is being on a boat for more than a couple hours seems awesome in theory. I mean, you're getting paid to be on a boat, but also the sun hitting the water, hitting you, the wind, the motion of the boat and everything. I mean, something as cool as being on a boat, people would love to get paid to be on a boat, but doing that for 6 hours a day, it definitely wears on your body and your mentality and everything. We're not on a boat every day, but some days, and it definitely is a challenge after a couple hours or so.
Man, that's true. Those heavy visitation, like holidays, I know we probably all do kind of an extended boat patrol on holiday weekends and things like that. I've kind of noticed the same thing when you get off that boat and get back to the office to get ready to go home kind of thing. Your mind just kind of feels like mush just because not only have you just been operating the boat, but, you're out there, trying to keep everyone safe. So you just have a mental fatigue from just keeping up with your situational awareness, just knowing what all is going on around you, what to look for on this vessel or what to look for on this swim beach or all that different stuff that's going on. I mean, it can, you don't realize it until when you're out there in the middle of it, but then once you get still, it kind of just hits you all at once. So that's a good point, David.
I think going off of that too, just adding on to what y'all both just said is the unfortunate side of sometimes being a ranger is that we do have to respond to emergencies. And we do a lot of education to try to limit the amount of emergencies that happen at our lake projects. But they still happen. And so that can really be one of the challenges as well to our jobs. And those don't necessarily happen often, but, whether it's a water related serious incident or something even in the parks, it could be a fender bender, it could be anything, but those can wear on us as well, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a great point because we are considered first responders. So you think about the stresses of, first responders, just when you hear first responder, as far as what you said, with emergencies, whether it's severe or, like you said, just a fender bender. That's a great point, Emily.
And it seems like those incidents tend to happen on holiday weekends as well. I mean,
they really do.
Yeah, let's say your average visitation a day is 100. On a holiday weekend, it may be 1,000 or something. So it just compounds everything. I mean, Elaine used to work at Yellowstone with the National Park Service. I mean, none of our lakes are really Yellowstone, but we may be a little bit close and stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you don't have as many people working on any given day, given how many visitors you might have, is something that is a challenge as well. Just you might not be where you need to be at the moment that somebody needs you there. So trying to figure out where you should be at any given point so that all of your visitors are safe and having a good time is also an important thing that can be challenging.
That was a great point, Elaine. I think, too, something that's a challenge here at Johnny H. Carr, which I don't know if it's a challenge as well at other lake projects, but is just balancing how much we have going on between different kind of sub-teams or subsections in our office. The parks and the recreation areas are really busy a lot of the time. Our shoreline team is really busy a lot of time. Our natural resources team is really busy a lot of time. And we all help each other out. But some days it just feels like you can't do everything you need to do with everyone that needs to be there and involved. It's just a hard balance of getting all of those things done and sorted, I guess.
Oh man, I felt that one for sure. Just, we split one of our ranger duties that recently retired between me and another ranger. So we have a shoreline ranger, then me being the interpretive. Well, we had one ranger that was the volunteer and community outreach ranger. So me and the shoreline ranger split his duties so that everyone didn't get them all. So between the interp stuff, and the community outreach stuff, which does kind of go hand in hand. That workload can get a little heavy at times, for sure. One of my favorite questions that I often get asked is, what should you study in college? I think we all come from kind of similar backgrounds. I studied park and recreation management in college. Personally, I would not suggest that unless your park and rec program is looped in with your natural science program. I know, for example, University of Georgia down at UGA, their recreation program is in with the same structure as their forestry program and stuff. And I think NC State's similar. Some of you guys down that way may know a little better than me at that. I kind of had a little hiccup in my career because there was a discrepancy with having a park and recreation management degree and not having enough natural science credits. Got that all ironed out at this point, so it's not an issue, but that is something that can happen if you want to go the rec program route and your rec program's not necessarily aligned well with the natural science program. So that's my experience from that side of things. There might be some of you folks that have natural science degrees that can speak a little more towards that side of things.
I think, Dylan, what you're getting at too here is, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong on this, but is that we have different classifications for our positions. For example, I'm an 0401, which I know doesn't make a ton of sense to perhaps folks. You might be listening going, what does that mean? I'm going to try to tell you now. But an 0401 is a certain classification for our job type that basically means we are in a biological related field. So we have to have a certain number of science credits like Dylan is talking about right now. And then we have other positions that are called 0025s. It's another way to classify our positions. And those folks don't have to have science credits. But if you're looking to advance in the agency itself, sometimes the positions require you to have those science credits. And so that's, I think, Dylan and Carmen, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, that's kind of one of it can be a challenge if you don't have the science credits and you're looking for a certain type of job, basically. Me as Ranger Emily, I went and got an environmental science degree, so I had the science credits, so it wasn't a challenge for me to be hired into an 0401 natural resource specialist park ranger position, but it's not that way for everybody.
Yeah, and just like we mentioned at the beginning, that kind of every lake is different in how the structure is and how many rangers they have and what types of jobs that they're specifically doing. So it kind of works the same way. You might have some lakes that have more park rangers in the natural resources specialist, 0401 series versus another lake might have more in the 0025 park ranger series, or it could be a mix. So it really does vary from project to project. But you can get more information on the qualifications for each of those. It's a very, very long website, but it's one of the OPM websites. But we also have a career link off of our recreation page where we have these FAQs, frequently asked questions, and that's at the top of the list, number 1. So you can get that link from there and explore that further.
Good deal. All right. So is there a student intern program? Who wants to answer that one? Did anybody here start as an intern out of curiosity?
Oh, I was just going to say I began, it's kind of changed. The program has changed a lot, but I began as a co-op student. So basically what that means is I went to school and worked at the same time. And for myself, I actually alternated semesters. So I would come work a semester at Falls Lake, and then I would go back to school, and then I would come back. And I kind of alternated for about a year or so doing that. And it was a very, very good program, and it, definitely introduced me to the Corps. And ultimately, I knew that's where I wanted to continue working. So that's how I started out.
I also started out as an intern, but I was what was then called a DA intern, which is a Department of Army intern. It now has a new name, and I don't know what it is. I think most of us still refer to it as the DA intern program. But I started in the same position I'm in now. It was basically just meant that the funding paying for the first couple years of my position came from Big Army, as they would say. But yes.
Is that what's now the Pathways program?
I think the co-op that Carmen was talking about is the Pathways intern now. DA intern it changed, and I cannot remember the name of it, but DA interns can also, if you look into the DA intern program and what it's called now, they're really across the board. The internships are in terms of what you do and which agency you're with and all that stuff.
Yeah, the Pathways program, did as Emily mentioned. That's what the co-op program is now. It's now called the Pathways program, and it's pretty cool. It offers basically there's two parts. There's an internship program, and then there's also a program for recent graduates that you can be hired under as well.
Good deal. The one thing I would like to mention too is we do get asked at things like job fairs and when we do programs for college groups and stuff like that, we do get asked quite a bit if we have any internships available or if we take interns or things like that. And what I make a point to always tell everyone is if you don't mind doing a unpaid internship, we do work with colleges and universities, and we will sign students up as volunteers under the volunteer program and then give them duties that meet their internship requirements while working closely with their professors and that sort of thing. So what I tell people is, yes, we always do have them available. It's just a matter of if you want to be paid or not, which, we all would rather be paid if we had the choice. But if it's just something you're really, really interested in, then that is an avenue you can take, which also kind of segues into the next question, which is what other things can I do to get experience?
Hey, Dylan.
Yeah.
I think, and David, I might be putting you on the spot, but have you all had Student Conservation Association interns before, SCA interns?
Yeah, back when we had the budget for it.
I hear that. But that might be another way to get experience and also be an intern, is to look for opportunities with the U.S. Army Corps field office sites, lake project offices through an entity like the SCA program, the Student Conservation Association.
Yeah, no, I almost forgot about that because Kaylee that used to work up there with you at John Carr, she started as a SCA intern when I was a seasonal at Kerscott. And so that's how she got her foot in the door. So yeah, that's a great point, Emily.
And generally, a lot of those SCA programs have, depending on the agency and the amount of work you're doing and the amount of hours, you might be eligible if you do enough hours for direct hire with different agencies, which is a better way to get your foot in the door.
That's actually how I started off with the Corps in 2010 was through the SCA. They paid for my housing and everything too. I forget, like $75 a week or something. So, it worked out for me. I just don't think the Corps has the budget for those type internships anymore, but other agencies I think do. I think we aren't choosing to go that route anymore.
Good deal. So, moving on from that, I know we kind of segued for just a minute there. What are some other things people can do to get experience?
Yeah, well, I kind of think it depends at what stage you are. If you're a student in high school or in college, there are a lot of opportunities to volunteer or also to work as a seasonal employee, either for the Corps or for other local parks near you. So there's state agencies, there's other federal agencies, of course there's the Corps, and all of these different parks organizations have volunteer opportunities and they have seasonal work opportunities, so you can work in the summer and kind of get a sense of how things work as a park ranger.
Yeah, that's a great point, Elaine. And to your point, you having worked for the Park Service is, experience does not have to be Corps of Engineers experience. It can be any kind
Absolutely.
of like experience, whether it be Corps of Engineers or Park Service or Forest Service, or even if it's like a nonprofit agency. Like I know our local partners, Dan River Basin Association, they take interns and volunteers both. So, through volunteering with them, you could volunteer with their educational program that, does programs just like we do, or it could be, more with their research and water quality side, which is just as relevant as the programming is. And you probably saw the same thing up at Yellowstone with Yellowstone Forever. I know I had a really good friend that worked for Yellowstone Forever for a while before he got his first full-time federal job. So there's all kinds of options out there when it comes to that. Anybody have any other ways besides volunteering or just, employment through other agencies or anything like that?
I don't know that this is an experience necessarily, but I really encourage folks when I talk to them at a career fair or just even one-on-one in the parks, if they're interested in a job, is to call and actually ask to speak to a ranger about what their job is like, what we do, our own path to getting hired, because it gives you a little bit more insight and information, right? Better prep for an interview, better information on how to submit, to USA Jobs if that's the way a position has been posted. So I really just try to encourage people to get as much information as they can about a position and what it actually entails before starting the application process or anything like that, I guess. That's not really experience, but I really encourage people to call and talk to us.
I was just going to say, Emily, you mean we have to work weekends and sometimes deal with fatalities too? I thought we just picked flowers every day. I mean, I don't know. This doesn't sound like what I want to do anymore.
I mean, that's exactly kind of what I mean, David, is to get more information and to figure out what our job as park rangers with the U.S. Army Corps entail. Elaine can probably mention it, but it is, while we all do similar things across different agencies as park rangers or natural resource specialists, it's not always the same. And so, what we do, the depth of what we do, how we do it, and how we handle it will vary depending on agency. And so, getting some information beforehand. And I personally am always willing to talk to somebody on the phone about what we do. So.
Yeah, isn't there that meme out there that what park rangers do, what I think I do, what my grandma thinks I do, what society thinks I do, and what I actually do?
Yes.
They're all different images.
That would be a pretty funny meme for us to actually come up with and put on our Facebook pages and stuff. We might need to look into that, David, because that's absolutely the case.
Yeah, one of you needs to get on making one of those. That way I can use it to advertise this podcast when I post it.
Honestly, I'm really into this idea, so we'll make this happen.
One other thing I was going to add, and this might sound really corny to some people, but if you're wanting a job in the outdoor jobs field, then get outdoors, through a variety of activities. I mean, it can be hiking, it can be camping, it can be hunting, it could be fishing, it could be boating. I mean, just all those sorts of things. And also, get to know what you're looking at. I mean, if you're not intimately familiar with the forest and things, I mean, that's okay. If you want to help yourself, order you some Peterson's field guides off of Amazon or something like that. And anytime you have a question about something that you're looking at outdoors, just learn to identify it. And then as you identify those things, they become memory. And then, that's experience. I mean, that's when you interview or something like that. I mean, that's something that's great to bring up. All right. Next question. Do we get paid like rock stars or what?
Well, we are paid on what's called the GS scale, which, if I'm being honest, I don't know what GS stands for. So somebody else is going to have to come in there and help with that one. But we get paid on the GS scale. So there's different numbers associated with our pay, and the pay is a range. I think we get paid all right, personally, but I love my job. So I guess, I'm willing to do it. But I'm a GS 9 is what my pay grade is right now. I don't know about everybody else's. And it's public information. You can Google GS9 and it'll tell you what the pay range is. That's kind of one of the nice things about the federal government. You know, you apply for a job, it's going to be on a scale. It might not be GS, but it's going to be on one of the scales they use. And it's generally public information as to what that level will get paid. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so there's a few different government pay scales. GS is the most common, and it stands for General Schedule.
There we go. I knew somebody would know it.
And then there's a few other ones, like I know from the rec world, looking at rec jobs over the years, for example, MWR, Military Welfare and Recreation, they have a lot of jobs that are NF pay scale, which stands for non-appropriated funding. Some of our maintenance guys are on a WG pay scale, which stands for work grade. So there's a few different pay scales out there. Like Emily said, we are on the GS, and I think right now, you're looking at most of our entry-level Ranger jobs are as a GS5, and you're looking at upper 30s. I want to say it's up around 39 now, and that's for like a seasonal job. When you get a full-time Ranger job, you're looking at usually a GS5, 7, 9 slot, meaning you advance a pay grade each year if you're doing your job well. And then that GS9 slot right now, I think, is right at about 60 a year. And then, you get on into managerial and supervisory roles after that. Like Emily said, you can just Google search GS pay scale, and it'll ping the pay scale right up, and you can look at every single grade level from 1 through 15 and how they increase and that sort of thing. But one thing I will say is federal benefits are great, and compared to other local organizations like state parks, for example, not to bash on them in any way, but typically we do get paid a little better than they do, at least for North Carolina and Virginia, and comparatively our benefits tend to be a little better too, both as far as coverage and as far as cost wise. That's just my 2 cents. All right, I guess I kind of got into the next question a little bit. Beyond pay, are there other benefits to working with the Corps? My favorite's the leave. I feel like we get quite a bit of leave time as far as accruing annual leave and sick leave and holiday leave when we don't have to work the holidays. But we get double pay on holidays, so that's a pretty good compensation there.
And night differential sometimes if we're working at night.
Yeah, no, that's a great point too, Emily.
I think some of the other non-monetary benefits, and y'all jump in, could even include training. We do get to, it was kind of hairy there during COVID. We weren't doing a lot of trainings. Now that we're kind of leaving that environment, we're able to do more person trainings, which generally for us means we might get to travel to new places, to network and meet and see other people in their positions and their lake projects and district offices and divisions and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes even those trainings are cross agencies, right? So you're getting to meet people from even other agencies. But I think that's one of the benefits as well, personally.
Yeah, no, that's a great point too.
Going back to the non-typical day, that is kind of cool about working for the Corps is you don't really have a typical day. You're not just stuck in front of a computer every day or stuck in front of visitors every day. And you can kind of cater it to what's most benefit that day. So I think that's pretty cool as well.
Yeah, some days you get to record a podcast.
Right. I think something else you could loop under that, and it both ties into what you was just saying, David, about the typical working day is, and you mentioned it earlier during that little session we had about the typical work day, but if you ever get a chance to either do disaster relief, or I know we briefly mentioned those overseas deployments earlier, that's really good pay. You kind of hate the reason that you're there, but if that's something that you're interested in volunteering for and you like to help people. Personally, I've done 2 disaster relief missions, one for Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico and then for Hurricane Ida in New Orleans. And those were both 1 month disaster relief deployments. And with a buku of overtime. I want to say it was something like, between 60 and 80 hour weeks. I can't remember. I mean, you basically work all 30 days straight, like 12-hour days. I can't remember what that comes out to, but yeah, I mean, it's a good deal. And what I enjoyed about those missions is, you're also getting to see a lot, on both instances. I'd never been to either location. So it was a way for me to both see that location and to help people, which I've always been about. So yeah, there's all sorts of fun opportunities out there. All right, speaking of fun opportunities, are there any opportunities for advancement? I know we've spoken about going from, or at least I have, about going from a seasonal ranger to a full-time year-round ranger, but I think only one of us here is above a GS9. So, Carmen, why don't you tell us about advancement?
Hot seat.
So we already talked a little bit about there being other positions past the 9 level, like our chief rangers, and then our assistant managers and managers are all on up the pay scale. But we also have positions that work out of our district office. And I'm fortunate that I work for the district, but I'm also out in the field. So I sit out at Jordan Lake, which is awesome. So I still get to come to the lake every day. But in that role, it's the district natural resource management section. So we're basically helping coordinate all the programs that are happening on the ground. So in my role, like I do a lot with the visitor assistance program, making sure all the rangers, are meeting the training requirements, putting on trainings, facilitating those, making sure everybody has the proper uniforms, doing a lot with water safety and outreach. So it's kind of a little bit, I guess, a larger scope in that it's a lot of more coordinating and just keeping track of what's going on at individual lake. But I will add that the great thing about being a park ranger with the Corps is that we have lakes all across the country. So, the positions as you move up in the pay scale are more limited. But if you're willing to relocate and go to other places, or if you're able to, sometimes you're not able to do that. But if you are, there are opportunities. Often it's easier to find those opportunities at the different lakes.
And a lot of times, too, we have temporary positions, which is an awesome way once you're in the agency to get experience doing a different job or being in a supervisory role or being in a role like Carmen's, and you just do it for, you just get a little taste. You just do it for a few months as they're trying to, backfill that position. So that's another way to also, make your resume look nicer, to get the opportunity for advancement, but also get to try some things out.
Yeah, no, definitely. Great points by everyone there. Let's see. Speaking of looking for advancement opportunities and getting a foot in the door in general, how do we find out about job opportunities with the Corps of Engineers? I'll tell you how I found out about mine real quick. It's kind of funny. Me and another ranger that works in our district, David down at Kerr Scott, we were both actually in the same college class called Program Planning, which worked closely with W. Kerr Scott to plan a river cleanup. So as part of that class, they assigned a ranger to us to kind of help guide us a little bit, if you will, in planning that program. And that's how we found out about the Corps and about job opportunities. Well, David got hired that next summer to work at Kerr Scott as a seasonal, and then he moved up the summer after that, and I filled in behind him. And the reason I found out about that was because Kerr Scott had come up to a job fair at Appalachian State, and I got to speaking to Scott, which is the same person that kind of mentored David and I, and he told me to go to USA Jobs, apply, and that's essentially how I got that first position, that first initial foot in the door. Speaking of that, as outreach rangers, I think we all do this. We usually set up booths for local job fairs and things like that, especially if we're working closely with colleges. I know I've done a few job fairs now at Ferrum University, which is pretty local to us. So what's some other ways, guys?
I mean, I feel like USA Jobs is the number one place to look. The only time that a job may or may not be posted on USA Jobs is if it's a direct hire position, which means the office itself is probably going to do the advertising. And so I know for direct hires, we'll put it on our Facebook page or things like that. But that's not necessarily helpful to everyone listening all the time to be going to everybody's individual Facebook page looking for stuff. So I know I sound like I'm saying the same thing over and over, but if there's a specific place you're trying to work or find out information for, just call us. Because if we have a direct hire or a temporary hire position open or something like that, we can get you hooked up pretty easily with the application process and even with the job. But for other positions, it's going to be USA Jobs, I feel like, personally.
Yeah, and I just went through that, Emily, of being on USA Jobs, looking at options. And you can even filter it by area. So if you want to stay close to home, or if there's a dream area that you want to move to and work in, you can set that up on USA Jobs so that you can get the notifications for the availability of jobs in that area.
That is a really awesome, fun fact / hack about USA Jobs. And Elaine, you might just need to do a whole podcast about stuff like that, because you're the one who's gone through it most recently from all of us. And I just learned something new in that moment right there, because I didn't even know about the notifications. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really helpful when you get it set up properly.
And it does seem like we always are hiring. I mean, it may not be where you want to be. It may not be a permanent job, but sometimes that's what you got to do to get that on your resume, to get your foot in the door, is take that position, maybe not where you want to be, or maybe not permanent, and it can help you get to where you want to be eventually. That's always a good thing.
Yeah, I feel like there's once you start meeting rangers, especially, and you're really getting to know them and talking to them, and they'll talk about how they moved around a lot to get back home, so that they could end up getting the job they want, their dream job near, where they're from, at a lake project near where they're from, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Like our project manager at Philpott, he was born and raised here around the Martinsville area. I know he worked here for a little while, worked at John H. Carr for a little while, worked for Regulatory for a little while, and then found himself back right here, on his home turf kind of thing. You definitely use the ability to move around to kind of take advantage of those job opportunities. All right. This one might be another good one for Elaine to hit on a little bit, because I'm sure she's went through it most recently. And that is, what is the interview process like to get a job with the Corps of Engineers?
Yeah, I can definitely talk about that. So the first thing to really understand about applying for and interviewing for the Corps and for any federal position really is you need to be patient. It is going to take a long time to get from the start to the end. So it took about a month and a half for me to even get an interview for this position. And then the interview itself is a pretty standardized interview. Every candidate gets asked the same questions in the same way. And so if you go into the interview and you feel like it's very impersonal and kind of formulaic, that's how it's supposed to be. It's nothing about you in particular. It's just everybody has to have the same opportunity and be asked the questions in the same way. And then after it does take another while before you actually go anywhere. So after getting interviewed, you'll eventually hear back, first with a tentative offer, and then there's a bunch of paperwork to do, and then later with a firm offer. And then from there, you get to start. For me, it took another month or so before I got to actually start working after that.
Well, it's good to know that hasn't changed very much. Just out of curiosity, I know I've experienced both, but how did the Corps interview compare with your interview with the Park Service? If you remember how that went, was it very similar, or was it different, or just curious?
That's a great question. They were completely different. When I interviewed for the Park Service, it was very conversational. It was just like having a conversation with the hiring manager. So it felt pretty informal. It was one person interviewing me for that position. Whereas for the Corps, you have a whole panel of people. It's either in person or a video interview. So they get to see you, you get to see them, and you have a time limit, and all that they can say in the Corps interviews are the questions. So there's no conversation, there's no chit chat back and forth. There's a lot of procedures that go into it. So it feels very different doing a Corps interview versus doing a Park Service interview or some other type of interview, which is just something to keep in mind going into them.
Yeah, no, it's great advice. I know I did one with the Park Service, and the one I did it was a phone interview and seemed fairly similar to most Corps interviews I've done. But I know a lot of it also depends on how many applicants you're going to have for like a specific location, or just the mannerisms of that hiring official or that particular manager that's looking for that position. I mean, I'll tell you straight up, for my very first Corps position as a seasonal, I didn't even get interviewed. I opened my email up one day and had a tentative job offer in it. So, I don't think that's a practice that's utilized very often anymore, but that's how that particular instance went. So I thought that was pretty interesting, to say the least.
I do want to jump in really quick just to say, Elaine's right. It feels sterile. Sometimes the interview feels sterile. It's hard for both the interviewee and the interviewer, right? Because the conversation would be so much more fun. But at the end, they're always going to ask a question. Do you have any questions, of the individual they're interviewing? That's your chance as someone who's applied and who has the interview to actually make that a little bit more conversational. Have a list of questions you want to ask. Make sure you share information about yourself, hit your main points. That's like the place to really get to know a little bit more, right, about what's going on and the job, and, be able to share even more about yourself. So just, it feels sterile, but there is that one little glimmer of light at the end there, that you can really, really interact a little bit more. So just a tip there.
Absolutely, Emily. That's a great point. And definitely going into an interview with the Corps, this is what I did. And I think it's something that you should consider if you're going to be interviewing for the Corps, is to have kind of a list of things, questions, of course, for the interviewers, but then also to have a list of things about yourself that you want the panel to know. And if all of the questions that they ask you aren't able to fit those into those questions and into your answers, to provide that at the end, because there is that time for you to add anything else you want to add. So if there's something that you're really proud of doing, or some really cool experience that you have that you haven't gotten to talk about, that is your opportunity to say it.
Yeah, great point. Great point, Elaine.
Absolutely. One thing I have, and just shameless insider secret here, is probably the last question you're going to get asked is, if offered this position, are you going to accept it? Pro tip, if your answer to that is no, then
you're not going to get the offer.
Number one, you should have already withdrawn your application. And number two, by doing that interview and saying no at the end, and unless you've heard something during the interview that's just completely turned you off. But if you know going into that interview that you're going to say no, then honestly, you've taken that opportunity from someone else who was on the applicant list. So that's just kind of and consider it. But I mean, sometimes it happens. You hear something in an interview where it's just like, hey, I'm not willing to do that. And if that's something that makes you instantly, like I said, turns you off and makes you say no, then, fine, it is what it is. But if you go into an interview knowing you're not going to take the job, just have a little consideration as far as that goes. All right. Any other interview insight?
We might have to do a whole episode on interviews later or something, because I feel like there's a lot there.
Oh, for sure. All right. That's kind of wrapping up. So for this last portion, what I think we're going to do is kind of like the icebreaker, is we're just going to go around the horn. And do you have any parting advice for someone looking to work with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers?
I would say just be tenacious. Don't give up. Keep going. The path might not be as clear as you would like it to be. You might have to meander and do some seasonal work, or kind of find your own way into the organization. But just keep going. Don't give up. Anything that you do will give you the experience that you need to be successful with the Corps. So just keep going and don't give up. And sooner or later, it'll all work out.
Maybe we should just end it there. That was awesome.
All right. Elaine's first podcast, and she's taking my job. No, that was great.
What Elaine just said is great. I think the only thing I would add is what I've said multiple times already, but just, if you're interested, you have an inkling, you might want to do something like what we do here in the Corps, is to talk to us, build that relationship with us, make those connections. And that'll just help with what Elaine just said, having it all work out in the end and sticking with it. So that's my only piece of advice.
Yeah, just get your name out there. I mean, people remember your name, and they'll want to make things happen for you. So just whether it's volunteering or college campus or anyway, just try to get your name out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of things I was going to say for this has already been hit on a little bit in the last question. Elaine mentioned being patient, and that is a huge one. It's a government process. It takes time. So definitely be patient. It was also mentioned you may want to be willing to move, like you move around to move up kind of thing, is sort of a government employee saying. That's one thing that I like to tell people as well. That's about it as far as I got for parting advice. Carmen, you have anything?
Yeah, all great things that y'all already mentioned. But definitely, we've talked about it several times, just kind of finding that experience where you can. It may not be with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers at first, but look for those, other agencies, state and local organizations that you can work with and volunteer with. And like Dylan, you mentioned, just getting outdoors and learning more about trees and plants and things like that are all very beneficial. I will add just a few things, we talked about throughout this interview that we just had. Some terms, remember you can look up the GS pay scale if you're interested in that. USA Jobs, you can do a quick Google search for that. And also I'll add again that we do have a careers page on our Wilmington District recreation site where you can explore more about the opportunities at the lakes, as well as you can look at our frequently asked questions that we have on there. So just wanted to throw that out there again.
Right on. Thank you very much, Carmen. That wraps up our little segment on park ranger careers. All right, so now we're going to turn it over to Elaine, and she is going to tell us what's on the horizon.
Yeah, so we have some pretty cool things coming up. So next month, we're excited to have some special guests on to discuss what our foresters and wildlife biologists do at the lakes. So if you've ever been at one of our lake projects and if you've seen fire or smoke, we do prescribed burning. And if you have questions about that, why it's done, what they're doing there, that's one of the many topics that we'll be exploring next time. We also have a few days coming up. There's the National Take a Walk Day in the Park, which is March 30th. There's the National Walking Day, which is April 3rd. And then Earth Day is coming up as well. That's going to be on April 22nd.
Very good. Thank you, Elaine. And thank you for being on our podcast for the first time. So super happy to have you.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So let's turn it over to David for our water safety message.
So I like to keep my water safety messages kind of brief, because when a lot of people hear the word safety, they may kind of tune out and everything. But we are heading into basically the rec season now. It's almost, at this time of recording, it's mid-March, almost end of March. Spring is here, summer is coming and everything. That brings a lot of people out to the water. And if you go to the headquarters water safety page, if you just type in "please wear it" into Facebook, you will see on the Corps of Engineers water safety page a whole bunch of memorials for people that didn't make it anymore, that were at a Corps facility and were planning to come home and didn't make it home. So everyone intends to come home after they visit a Corps lake, but not everyone does, is the simple truth and everything. So if you happen to be by a Corps lake, really anytime, and something happens and a ball drifts away or your boat drifts away, your canoe, get into trouble with your canoe, let those things go. You don't need to keep chasing them. You don't need to extend effort into trying to get that thing back. You can always get personal property back. You can't always get a life back. So just be safe out there. You never really intend to not come home, and it does happen to people. So just try to be safe out there.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David. And that concludes this month's episode of Rangers to the Corps. As always, thank you very much for listening. Feel free to leave us a comment. We'd love to hear your feedback. If it's good, bad, indifferent, we don't mind, especially if it's something you're interested in hearing about. And we will see if we can't make an episode about it. So thank you. Be safe on the water and have a good month.